Pushkin.
Cheryl Lynn's Got to Be Real, Steely Dan's Black Friday, Toto's Georgie Porgy, all some of the most monster keyboard piano grooves of all time. And they all have at least one man in common. That's prolific musician and songwriter David Paich. David honed his chops early growing up in LA, where he worked under the tutelage of his father, Marty Paich, an esteemed composer who worked with artists like Mel Tormé, Ray Charles, and even Ella Fitzgerald. While in college at USC, David started playing keyboard professionally and touring with Sonny and Cher. From there, he went on to co-write and play on Boz Scaggs' multi-platinum album, Silk Degrees. He also worked extensively with Quincy Jones, playing on multiple iconic albums, including Michael Jackson's Thriller and Bad. All throughout his work as a session musician, David also served as Toto's principal songwriter and wrote chart-topping hits like Rosanna, Hold the Line, and, of course, most famously, Africa. On today's episode, I talked to David Paich about what it was like to be such an accomplished player at such a young age. He shares crazy stories about working with Michael Jackson and Quincy on Thriller, and how he came up with the intro to Michael Jackson's Human Nature, probably the greatest keyboard riff of all time. David also plays parts from some of the best songs he's written and talks about how they came to be. This is Broken Record, liner notes for the digital age. I'm Justin Richmond. Just a quick note here. You can listen to all of the music mentioned in this episode on our playlist, which you can find a link to in the show notes. For licensing reasons, each time a song is referenced in this episode, you'll hear this sound effect. All right. Enjoy the episode. Here's my conversation with David Paich. A few weeks ago, I was on a run, and Cheryl Lynn's Got to Be Real came on when I was on my run. And I was like, that's the perfect groove. Like, the keyboard is the perfect groove. I was like, I got to go home and learn that. So I went home and I just started messing around. I was like, who played on this? I had no idea. And I looked it up, and it was you.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck? This guy does everything.
Me and Ray Parker helped me put the rhythm section together. We got Gadsden and a guy that just moved out from Detroit and played on the Emotions record named David Shields. And that was like the last record he did, was like Got to Be Real kind of thing. But that was a great rhythm section, and we cut that, and it's one of my favorite R&B things that I've ever done. You know what I mean?
Do you mind playing just the riff?
I'll show you. The song started this way with me coming in with the riff, and Cheryl started singing a little bit, and then David Foster came in, and I was in Sunset Sound, and he came in and played a little B section for me, you know. But the riff goes right.
That's so greatest groove, man.
Yeah. Then I heard a Mariah Carey song that sounds just about like Got to Be Real. She's got a song out. This came out right after that.
Really?
It sounded like Got to Be Real, yeah. Same changes.
Did you reach out?
No, man. Like, it's all good, you know?
Your dad was a producer on that, right?
He was, co-producer. We co-produced that together. He kind of discovered her, you know what I mean?
It's 1978.
1978. You're right.
And you're called in by your dad sets this
My
up?
dad made a call to someone at Sony, which was CBS at the time, and said, I just heard this girl. He had a friend that worked, Butler, I forget what his first name, was the jazz department at Sony. And my dad called him and said, I just heard this girl on the Gong Show, Cheryl Lynn. And he says, well, funny enough, we're trying to do an album with her right now. And they cut some cuts with her. And so they gave it to my dad. Had come off of Silk Degrees with Boz Scaggs. So my dad said, well, if I team up with David, let's co-produce this thing. So we ended up co-producing her first album, you know.
Wow. And David Foster is a part of that?
He's a part of that. He came in just for a second. I was at Sunset Sound, and Foster just came over to hear what we were doing. And I said, I'm working on this song, Got to Be Real. So, you know, he went.
So when you're called in to work on a song like that, or I mean, obviously you're a bigger part of this project in general, but when you're working on a song like that, how did that riff come to be? Like, how did...
Well, I heard it was kind of influenced by the Emotions to the song called Best of My Love.
Yes.
And I heard dun, 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 and I like that beat, but I always like putting the hump in it, you know. I had Gadsden on drums, you know what I mean? He just killed it, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And at the same time, after I found that out, I was looking at the year 78, and I realized at the same time that record is huge.
Yeah.
You're putting out Toto's first record.
Yeah, first album. And consequently, Cheryl sang on Georgie Porgy.
Georgie Porgy, which I never knew that was her.
Yeah, that was her. She just came in because we weren't going to put the song on, because I'd get to the part, I'd sing it, Georgie Porgy, and it was just like white bread, you know what I mean? And Cheryl Lynn heard it, and she goes, well, let me sing that. And she goes, Georgie Porgy, pudding pie, kiss the girls. And we crossed over into the R&B market. It sold like 1 million copies, man.
Yeah, you know? Man. So do you remember writing that song, Georgie Porgy?
Yeah. I was listening to a lot of dance music. I was listening to a lot of Barry White because he had started his stuff with piano. And I was listening to Quincy Jones on the I Want You album with Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
And because my friend...
Is that Leon Ware?
Yeah. Leon Ware was a friend of my dad's. And I'd written something with Leon Ware. And I was very influenced by that album. It had Chuck Rainey and Gadsden on it, those guys.
Beautiful sound.
I Want You, you know what I mean? And it was very much that, it kind of came out of that era, you know what I mean?
Amazing. This is your first album with Toto.
Yeah.
Now, you're accomplished, we'll talk about it, but you played on so many records throughout the 70s. Yeah. How are you thinking about writing this song? I mean, you have that wonderful piece. You maybe have that second part, that Barry White sounding piece. How are you putting it together, the lyrics?
That's just because I've learned to get the form of a songwriter to have a verse, a B section, and a chorus. And then kind of maybe an instrumental or a bridge. And I'm not a big fan of bridges. I just like verse, chorus, instrumental, and take it out.
No bridge for you, huh?
Bridge, because people, they kind of throw bridges away.
Yeah.
I like the Beatles and Elton and those guys, when they write a bridge, it's like it lifts the song, which is what a bridge should do to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
At what point would you take a song like that to the rest of the group?
Right as soon as we gotten our deal, and I've been playing this a little bit, a little bit with Jeff. We go and do sessions together. And on the breaks, when everybody else was out of the room, I'd start playing these things and Jeff was getting to the groove. So we rehearsed a lot of our album on other people's records.
Really?
You know what I mean? Just jamming on them when there's breaks or no one's in the room or whatever, So when I got to the record, I had like 2 or 3 things already cooking, you know what I mean?
How did you guys get your deal?
Interesting. We never had to perform live to get our deal. We're the only group, and the only group that got to produce itself. We had people named Don Ellis, vice president of CBS, and a guy named Terry Powell. And after we'd done the Boz Scaggs record, Silk Degrees, there was a lot of spotlight on us because we were the rhythm section for that whole record.
Yeah.
And then we went out on the road with them too and toured with Boz. And so CBS was like, well, why don't you guys form a band? And we had already been planning this whole thing since high school to put our band back together, high school band. So we were like, oh, good idea, you guys. And we started working on demos then. And I did Miss Sun for a demo, which was Boz Scaggs' song, a song I wrote for Boz. And we just did some demos, and I started writing more, getting into my writing, and it just happened.
And because you guys were so adept in the studio, they were totally comfortable letting you guys just take the reins, produce.
Yeah, they were letting us do whatever we wanted to do,
Wow. What does it feel like to be you in 1978? I mean, Georgie Porgy's on the radio, Hold the Lines on the radio.
Yes. Yeah, it was great.
Got to Be Real's on the radio.
The first time we heard ourselves on the radio, we all called each other so fast on the radio. I was at my sister's apartment, and I heard this piano, and I said, that sounds really familiar. I said, it actually sounds like me playing. Oh, fuck, that's our record. It's on the radio. And we were all calling the radio stations, requesting it and shit like that, like teenagers, you know what I mean?
And did it feel different with it actually being your group,
yes.
your song versus you playing on?
And we were like screaming kids, you know what I mean? Oh my God, I can't believe it. We tried calling each other, and all the lines were busy because we were all calling each other.
Calling the radio.
That's right. I'll call in all of our friends to request the song.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because back then, if you had people called in enough, they'd add it to the station,
What station were you guys first getting played on?
KJR up in Seattle. There was a guy named Steve West, who was a friend of our managers, because our managers had managed Chicago and Rufus.
Amazing.
That's what they had. And so they knew program directors all around the United States. So this guy, they hopped on it. And as soon as a P1, which is the top radio stations, or P1s, as soon as he went on it, it broke. And everybody went on it,
Wow.
And it ended up going double platinum, the record.
Obviously, if you listen to that first record, it's pretty clear you guys are fluent musically.
Yeah.
Like you can play anything. I was always curious if on the label side or manager side, was there ever any like, well, guys, like Hold the Line feels very different from Georgie Porgy.
Oh, absolutely. They were like, there's a lot of the comments where there's no thread. You guys don't have a sound. What is your sound? We can't tell you if you're an R&B group or you're a rock and roll group or adult contemporary group. What are you? And we just said, this is it. This is what we are. We do all this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because to your point, Georgie Porgy feels like a song that would have, like, you know, I mean, the way they grouped things back then, that would have been like a song, would have been a huge hit on black radio.
That's
and then
right.
Hold the
That's
Line,
right.
there's no way that would have
That's
ever
right.
played on, you know?
You're totally right. You know what I mean? It was all thought of like that, you know? But that's why we wanted to be different. We wanted to just do good music of any kind, any genre, you know?
When you guys started going out on that record, what were you noticing about your audience? Was it growing over time?
It was a little bit. You know, we waited until we had, again, the double platinum album before we went out and started touring a little bit, you know?
That was uncommon then, too. I mean, that's a common occurrence now that someone has this huge album or huge song and then has to go figure out how to go do a live show.
That's right.
Less common then.
Yeah, less common then. Yeah, you had to kind of work your way up and make an audience. But the thing happened, it broke in Europe. And we didn't know what Europe was all about. Europe in Amsterdam, there was a guy named Big Al, who was the DJ there. And he broke, I think, Hold the Line there in Amsterdam. And Europe just went nuts, like Beatle crazy nuts over this stuff. So when we did a promotional tour there, they took us around to all the clubs where they were playing our music. And it was just like, it was great. You know what I mean? There was just so many people screaming and everything like that. But he broke our record. And then we started getting offers for gigs with good money back then to come in and play shows, you know, to headline and shit over in Europe and stuff. So Europe has just been a big cash cow and a great, long, multi-generational audience for us since then. And they never, even you can not have a hit record for a long time and they'll still be coming to your concerts and stuff like that. Very loyal fans and great music audiences over in Europe.
You had your like an incredible career as a studio guy at the time. Were you thinking for sure that first record was going to be what it was, that it would have the
we were planning on it. We always had confidence in ourselves. That's the one thing Toto did. We knew what we could do if we got the chance. You know what I mean?
So you guys were ready to become the main show, in other words.
Yeah. We were shooting for the big time the whole time.
So tell me a bit about growing up. What were your first encounters with music?
I grew up in Reseda till I was 5. And my father, I remember my father playing piano. He had a piano room there. He did all of his writing. And I remember hearing the Blues in the Night in there. You know, Blues in the Night. He had done a version with Ella Fitzgerald and Mel Tormé. And so that was the first song that I picked out on the piano.
Wow.
My dad heard me picking it out, so he said, you know how to play that? Then I started taking piano lessons and stuff. That's when you knew that I had some kind of gift, you know.
And you were a kid at that point?
Yeah, I was like 5.
5.
Okay. But I didn't start studying piano until I was 8 because I got into drums. My dad was using a drummer named Shelly Mann. Shelly Mann just did a whole bunch of things with Bill Evans, and he did all the Mancini stuff.
Yeah.
He had the Shelly the Man and the Manhole, his club. But I used to sit next to him and just watch him play drums, and that's all I could think about. 24 hours a day was drums.
Wow.
And then I started getting more serious about piano when my dad said, you know, if you have to get your technique together or you're not going to be able to make it. So I got a warning. I got a wake-up call early, and by the time I was 12, I started studying classical music. My dad put me with a classical teacher, and I started, you know, going through all the literature and stuff like that.
Were you into it at that time? Get into the class? No. Okay.
No. But I knew I wanted to be a professional musician. So I was like, whatever it takes. This is the road I'm going down? Fine.
Even if it feels like it's taking you further away from the
even
stuff
if it's
you
like
want.
it's hard and it has nothing to do with rock and jazz.
Yeah.
You know, but I knew that my dad said Oscar Peterson studied classical. All these guys studied classical, you know. So if you want to play like Oscar, you better spend the time, you know.
I feel like a lot of times kids want to buck their parents, or, you know, my dad played football, and so I wanted nothing to do with football, you know.
Was he professional?
He did play professionally for a bit and got injured, but
cool, man. I'm a big NFL nut.
Everyone is, and I'm not, just honestly because
Your dad.
It was just too.
Probably.
It was just like everything was centered.
Everything
around
was like,
football.
oh yeah, I bet. I bet you were just smothered with that
Smothered
shit.
with it. And I was just like, I want to go do music or whatever. I mean, what do you think it is about your relationship with your dad that allowed you to connect with him, with what he does professionally?
Well, because I love music, and I was a very quiet kid, and you had to be quiet in those days. You couldn't talk at all. When we were in the studio with my dad, there is no talking log with musicians or anything like that. You have to be I was a deaf mute. You know what I mean? So me and my dad got along real great, and he'd show me how to do things. We watched football and baseball together and stuff. But he was always working. So the first job I had, Joseph Williams and I talk about this all the time because my dad was peers with John Williams. They were good friends. Joseph and I talk about our first jobs as students to them were sharpening his pencils and making sure they didn't run out of erasers. That's our job. You sit in a room all day long, not say a word, and just hear zzz on the sharpening pencils zzz in the room, like all day long.
Amazing.
That's what we did. And then finally I started singing a few things. My dad goes, sing me a line here for this. And I'd sing a line in an arrangement, and he'd use it. You know what I mean?
As he was composing or arranging
He was
for...
composing and arranging for The Fifth Dimension. He did Up, Up, and Away for them.
Yeah.
He did produced and arranged The Way We Were for Barbra Streisand. And all these big orchestral things, So, and I got to help him on those arrangements,
Once you got to a certain level, would he show you how he approached
Yes.
those things?
Absolutely. Yeah, I got him, and he had a master's degree in music composition. So he knew how to teach me, but he never stopped writing. He was a writing machine, like John Williams, same thing, a writing machine. All they do, you just see him writing pencil to paper, And it's amazing what those guys that knew because of their classical training, how that would translate to orchestra.
Yeah.
When you just have a piano, guys do it now because they can play they can play a string sound, they can play a flute sound, and you can hear, oh, that'll work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where back then they just had pianos.
Yeah.
They didn't have samplers and all that stuff. So my dad taught me. Literally, I was his apprentice for 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
It was great.
Did he have any like maxims or things he would always return to or things he'd always tell you, like things he'd return to?
My dad had lots of rules.
Yeah.
Probably like your dad had some rules.
Yeah,
you know
dad's
what I mean?
good about that.
Yeah, my dad was like, hey, the melody, the singer is the most important part. Make sure you can hear the melody, the singer. The singer is the whole thing. The singer and the song, and you're just servicing the singer,
That's great.
And he worked with just great singers, Lena Horne, Sammy Davis, Jesse Belvin, Ella, Sarah Vaughan, Ray Charles. I mean, everyone.
Insane.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize the level of talent your dad was working with?
I didn't until we would start going to shows at the Greek Theater, and Sammy Davis would be there or somebody like that, and they'd introduce my dad and put a spotlight on him in the audience. And I went, wow. My dad would stand up, everybody would be applauding for him. And once I heard that, I was like, that's pretty cool.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, just be a kid and you're Sammy Davis Jr.
And everybody respects your dad. That's the whole thing. All the adults who worked for my dad were super nice to me. They treated me like I was an adult. And they were all dressed so cool. They dressed like, all the dressing guys came from like Ellington's band. The way those guys would, gold cufflinks and loose ties and hats on and lots of jewelry and all this stuff, where I was looking at my school teachers like, this is boring right here. I'd go with my dad's guys and they're all dressed sharp and they're super nice and smoking cigarettes, doing shit, So it was a cool existence. It was like the jazz area. Jazz area was still there. My dad was still making jazz records with singers at the time. So I got to see that crossover when I was a kid.
We have to pause for a quick break, and then we'll come back with more of my conversation with David Paich. We're back with more from David Paich.
You told me when you were before we started recording that you were 14 when you met Quincy Jones for the first time?
I was 14 when I met Quincy. My dad was working on one of Quincy's solos album, and I forget the name of the album, but the song was called The Anderson Files. And it was a Sean Connery movie that had come out. Quincy had done the music for it. Well, Quincy used to have my dad ghost for him, ghost arrange. And my dad did a couple charts for him, and I got to help my dad with those charts. I'll sing a couple lines to him, you know.
Really?
And so I went to Quincy's house, and I think it was Benedict Canyon at the time. I think he lived there, Bel Air. And anyway, I met him, and you know, I ended up working for him later on the Thriller album, and James Ingram and Patty Austin, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we've been family members, Quincy, with us since I was a kid, you know.
So crazy. So you're a kid and you're immersed in this world of jazz.
Yeah.
Through your father and
Yeah.
through like just your interests too, and you're learning and Oscar Peterson's heroes. You're picking up classical music, trying to get ready. And then the 70s hit, and you start doing some incredible sessions, like really young.
Yeah. The first hit record I did was Seals and Crofts' Diamond Girl. Okay? That was one of the first sessions, but that was the first hit record I had. And once I had that, the word got around, and I started getting calls for sessions. You know,
I heard a story about you being at USC.
that was me. That was during that time.
And
yeah.
you got a call from
Jackson Brown. called
Jackson
me.
Brown.
And it was so funny because it was like USC at the time, in the dorm I was in, which was an all-boy dorm, it was like Animal House. You know what I mean? I mean, there were guys showing movies, throwing parties and shit. And there was only the phone at the time. No one had cell phones. It was a pay phone in the hallway. And the guy knocks on my door, and I'm in the room doing something, I forget. And he says, "There's a guy named Jackson Brown on the phone for you." I go, "Oh, don't hang up on him." And I got in the hallway, and he goes like, "Where the hell are you at?" It sounds, you know, because people are screaming and doing all kinds of shit. And he says, "We want you to come down and play on his For Every Man record down at Sunset." And I played on a song called "These Days" for Jackson
one of his
Brown.
incredible signature songs that he wrote when he was a kid, and Nico did, and then he
John
did his-
Haney was there at Sunset Sound, you know.
Wow.
And it was cool.
When you turn up, when you're coming from the environment that you were
My
coming out of,
environment,
and you're driving then down to the
I
studio.
was like no switch. I was like had my jacket, my jeans on. It's like where I used to just stay in my clothes. You know what I mean?
How often would you walk into a session like that and have to play on something you weren't too into?
Quite a bit. I started weeding out those sessions though. I wasn't a great reader. I'm not a great reader. There's guys that sight read, and that's their job.
Yeah.
What they do. A guy I learned from, Mike Lang, who was one of the best. He did all Jerry Goldsmith stuff. So I would start to go, how much reading is involved? I'd have to ask, because my dad told me to do that, because he would have to do the same thing. John Williams was the guy you'd call if you want sight read stuff. And my dad would just do sessions with jazz guys where the reading wasn't too terribly hard, you know?
Right.
So I got a reputation for being a rock and roll player and an R&B player. I started working at Motown when I was 18 with Motown out in the West Coast called Mo West. Wow. And so we did all these orchestral dates with rhythm section, 2 drummers, and everything. It was live music doing stuff. We did some stuff for Thelma Houston and Diana Ross and some of the Jacksons, you know?
My gosh, man. I mean, obviously you got the talent and everything,
Yeah.
but what luck too, because it feels like the 70s really, like to your point of now there's Mo West. It's like the business really seemed to be coming out.
It really
this
did.
way.
I mean, it was thriving, the session industry and songwriters and doing all this kind of stuff. I hadn't hit as a songwriter yet, but that led up to Jeff introduced me to Boz Scaggs.
Yeah.
Because Jeff and Boz had been producing a guitarist that was with the Allman Brothers named Les Dudek. And they needed an organ player. So I played Hammond pretty good. And we went out and we did that album with Boz producing. And Boz liked how I played. So he asked me if I wanted to maybe co-write an album. He was looking for a co-writer. He'd never co-written with anybody. Wow. And so I said, hell yeah. And we sat down. And I think it was on this piano up at Santa Barbara. My dad had a ranch up there. We stayed there for 2 weeks and wrote like most of the stuff on Soaked Degrees album on piano, you know. Wow. And that album just took off. That album was like a pinnacle, you know, watershed album.
Yeah.
You know?
Low Down. I mean.
Yeah. Lido, you know.
Unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
How were the Steely Dan sessions?
Steely Dan
worked
sessions
on?
were fun. Okay. Donald and Walter characters. Me and Jeff idolized them. Jeff was in Steely Dan for a while. You know, he was the drummer. So they heard about us. They wanted to start using session players instead of their band. So somehow we got a call. Jeff knew their guitar player, Denny Diaz, and they called Jeff, and they were looking for a keyboard player that could play other keyboards. So they called me, and I was on clavinet. It was on the Pretzel Logic album. It was a song called Night by Night that I played on. And I was playing, all I had to do was keep time on the clavinet, because Billy Preston, Out of Space, had come out, and I was all over the clavinet. That was my axe, Give me a wah-wah pedal and a clavinet, and I'll kill it, you know what I mean? So I did that. Then they did an album after that, was Katie Lied, which Jeff played on the whole thing. I played on Black Friday. That was me and Michael O'Mardian playing keyboards. And I played on Dr. Wu on that album, on Katie Lied. But they were fun because Donald was so neurotic and anxious. He'd be pacing back and forth, singing the guide vocal. But the lyrics were so interesting. We were just like, man, dig, it's deep. You had to concentrate. Like, don't start listening to them singing because you'll fuck up. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And now, in hindsight, people kind of regard Steely Dan and those sessions and the work that was done as that's almost biblical. It's like you can't touch it.
That is.
Did they have that reputation at the time when you were?
They didn't. They were kind of on the dark side and low key, and people didn't know about them. Steely Dan wasn't a big no-no. They had Ricky Don't Lose That Number was the one song that they did, but it was, other than that, they were kind of eclectic. You know what I mean? And they were doing different kinds of stuff, jazzy kind of stuff back then, and they weren't mainstream. The record companies didn't know what to do with them at all until Irving Azoff said, I know what to do with them. And he signed him, got Warner Brothers to sign him, you know what I mean? Away from ABC Dunhill,
Wow, man.
When
did your interest in songwriting start to?
I've always been I started in high school when Elton John first came out with his first record. I just wanted to be Elton John. I mean, that was my hero. Yeah. I had glasses on, short hair, and performed rock and roll at the piano and stuff. So I just started writing songs, copying his kind of songs. And also, I had known, my dad did a lot of work with Jimmy Webb. I learned that's the guy I started copying, first, emulating his, trying to emulate him.
Before you get into Elton, it's Jimmy Webb.
Jimmy Webb. And I was trying to play like him and write like him before I made the Elton John connection. It was my apprenticeship, you know what I mean? That's how I learned.
What was it like going to school and you're like doing this kind of thing?
I was doing, here's the trip, okay? Me and Jeff and David Hungate were Sonny and Cher's rhythm section on the road. When I got out of high school, the first gig I had was touring with them, okay? On the road. And they had the Sonny and Cher show at the time. They were the biggest thing in the United States. They were getting like $100,000 a night. So me and Jeff, I joined. Jeff had already been with them for 6 months. He left high school early. And so my dad said, okay, he's going to college next year. Now, how are we going to deal with that? And the Sonny and Cher people said, we will fly him in to go to his classes when we're not playing and shit like that. And so they flew me in. I was going to USC a couple days a week. I was missing a bunch of classes. But I would go to USC. I would do an Ironsides date, and I would fly back to Las Vegas to conduct for Sonny and Cher.
Wow.
That was a trip.
I imagine you probably didn't care about going to USC. Was it just like your parents?
I just had to do it. I had to do it to fill out my grades and pass.
What was it like hanging with Sonny and Cher?
He was kind of her fall guy. You know what I mean? She would make jokes, and he was the little short Italian guy. But they were selling out these huge arenas. We met all these promoters, all the big Elton John promoters, all the big agents and everything like that, because they were big time. They had their own jet. We were traveling on Hugh Hefner's Playboy jet was the jet that we traveled on.
Taking you back and
forth? With like bunny stewardesses, okay? And I was just out of high school. We were all just out of high school. And we were just like, you got to be friggin' like, it's off the scale. We were in shock. We were kind of in shock. Like, what do we do? Of course, Jeff was an old hand. Jeff was like, drummers putting the moves on everybody. You know what I mean?
He had 6 months more experience than you guys.
Oh, man. I was newbie. I was new meat, man. I was just like, yes, ma'am. You know?
When did you first meet the Porcaro brothers? I mean, because Jeff,
when I was 14 and a half.
14 and a half.
15, you know? And I met a Mike, and Steve was always playing different instruments. He was playing a French horn. He played a cello. And Mike was Mike played some drums, and then Mike started studying bass. And Mike was a great bass player. He was our high school bass player, and he was great.
When did you meet Steve Lukather?
Andy Leeds, Steve's little younger brother, was hanging out with Steve Porcaro and Steve Lukather and Mike Landau. They were all friends. So I was starting my band, and I was looking at like Dean Parks and Louis Shelton and some Larry Carlton. And Andy says, you need to check out these guitar players that are with Steve Porcaro's band. And so I went to Taft High School, which is right down there in Winnetka and Ventura. And I walked in and I heard somebody playing like Jimi Hendrix. I thought the band was on a break, and they put a record on and they were playing Hendrix. And I walked in there and Lukather was on stage, and Landau. Landau was real short. He was a real short guy. And Lukather had on a monkey mask, a rubber mask. And I couldn't see him that well because it was kind of smoky, and I was in the back of the thing. But I'm looking, and this guy's looked like he's been in prison or something like that. And I get closer, and I realize he was doing like leaping in the air like Pete Townsend, sliding on his knees, playing Johnny Be Good, singing it with a monkey mask on. That was just Lukather, crazy guy. You know what I mean? He was silly crazy. Okay, and he still is silly crazy. But that's how I met him. And I was looking at Mike Landau, and I thought Landau had a Stratocaster. Yeah. And I like Stratocasters. So I said, I think maybe the little guy that plays like Hendrix. And Lukather says, no, man. He says, the other guy's a star. We need a star in our band. And Jeff said, that's our guy right there. So Jeff picked him, and I said, I don't have a problem with that. But he was new, and he was just shredding the whole time. I said, yeah, but he's got to play like on our records.
Yeah.
And Lukather says, he'll learn. We'll put him next to Carlton and Louis Shelton. He'll learn fast. And he did.
Okay.
Very quick study. And then you hear him play on Georgie Porgy, and you hear him play on our first album. He was already seasoned, you know what I mean, by 78,
In a way, like real fortuitous you guys got him, because he did. It's so funny. Like by the time you guys are really starting to take off, it's like, the Van Halens of the world are out there,
right.
and this really kind of heavy guitar sound is popular.
Yeah.
And you guys have Steve to kind of bring that to your group.
Steve was friends with all the heavy metal players. Him and Eddie were best friends, immediately, and were until when Eddie passed,
Wow.
So Eddie Van Halen was always hanging out with Lukather. Lukather had all the hammering shit that Eddie was doing down, and it was fun time because you had to have a gunslinger guitar player. We had the guy.
Yeah.
It was Lukather, you know? He was just shredding. He would rip all these guys. He had more chops than any guitar player in town. I mean, Larry Carlton, all these guys. Lukather was like Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin kind of chops. That's what these guys had, chops in high school.
Wow, man.
Unbelievable.
It's amazing all the talent that you guys had. That you guys to this day are able to still remain friends.
Oh, we are.
Some people, but I mean, because there's a world where you or Steve or Lukather could have just been like, I want to do my thing. Really.
Well, we weren't. No one. Everybody was. The bands were the thing at the time. They say there's a saying now. Back in the day when I was growing up, everybody was in bands.
Yeah.
Now they're singers.
Yeah.
Now it's all about singing, and I think it's great that everybody's singing now. I wish I'd studied singing. My dad didn't want me to be a singer because he thought I would end up in a piano lounge being a singer, piano player, entertainer. And that was the worst word at the time. My dad said, you don't want to become an entertainer. You want to be a musician.
Really?
And so I missed out on singing lessons and stuff, which I ended up taking later on and stuff like that.
I was going to ask about the band. Like, did you guys think of yourselves? Obviously, you guys are like incredible musicians, but did any of you guys think of yourselves as singers?
Lukather could sing a little bit. He could sing like Georgie Porgy. He sang, I'll Be Over You, Won't Hold You Back. And I could sing barely to just get some of my songs out. But we found
cool
a singer.
That you guys would like trade off singing, like it'd be Lukather into you into.
Well, that was the whole idea. I used it as a model the Beatles. I like the Beatles because you never got tired. It wasn't one guy singing a solo record. I don't care who the artist is. A whole album of them, I get a little bored. I like Fleetwood Mac and I like the Beatles because they had diversity in their singing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to do with our band. We did it on the first album. Those guys had never sung. I'd never sung. I mean, really on an album before, right. And we all sang on the first album.
And then you guys have a singer, Bobby Kimball.
And then we had to get a singer because they were kept going. Well, who's your singer? Before they signed the paper, they want to know, do you have a singer? And a band that I had been co-produced called SS Fools, had a singer named Bobby Kimball, and they broke up. And I said, let's try this guy out. And he came in, and I played Hold the Line, and he just grabbed the lyrics, and we started ripping Hold the Line. And it sounded, the first time we played it, it sounded like the record. Okay,
Really?
with him singing and us playing. So everybody's looking around the room. We're looking at each other like, we're a band.
Yeah.
We're a band. We knew we were a band,
We have to take another quick break, and then we'll be back with more from my conversation with David Paich. Here's the rest of my conversation with David Paich.
Let's jump ahead to you reconnect with Quincy to do Thriller. Do you know, was it Michael? Was it Quincy? Was it the both? How did you guys end up getting involved?
I ended up getting in because Steve Porcaro had been doing programming synthesizers for David Foster and Greg Phillinganes and all Quincy's people. I wasn't in that club yet. So Steve, what are you doing? He goes, I'm doing a Quincy Jones date. I said, you know what? I want to go do a Quincy Jones date, so I'm gonna be your assistant, and I want to carry a piece of gear in to get in to the door. So I got in the door. So I got in the door. I think they were doing Donna Summer's. I think it was State of Independence. That was Steve Porcaro did that, and I was kind of playing for him because he would be the major programmer, but I could play really pretty well. So set up the stuff, set up the sounds, and Swineen would say, Steve, play something. And Steve would say, well, that's David's here. Dave, play something. And I started playing, and Quincy would walk in the room and go, wow, that's nice. What are you doing? Can you stay? Can you hang out a little bit? And I'm like, sure. And ever since then, I did the Donna Summers, James Ingram, and then I got called on Thriller, you know what I mean? Because I was part of Quincy's club.
And so Quincy later said, and I mean, you can demur if you want, but Quincy later said that the Billie Jean bass line was a rip of that State of Independence programming, that thing that you and
Really,
Porcaro,
I didn't know you said that.
Yeah,
but that could have been, you know.
Slow down.
That. Now that I think about it, I'm going to tell Steve that today.
Yeah, because let me know what he says, because
I'm going to tell him.
That's
he arranged. We brought all of our synthesizers down there. I mean, there was a room full of synthesizers, and Steve was doing that live. It had the drum machine. It had all the synths pumping, and basically the whole record was done with Steve Porcaro doing synthesizers on his microcomposer.
So you guys basically play on Human Nature. I mean, you guys do a number of you play on a number of different things on Thriller, but Human Nature really is it's Toto essentially. Are you mad at Steve when he takes a song like Human Nature to Michael instead?
Hell no.
What a fucking song.
No, because the Toto would have never done that. So Toto,
really?
Nah, I don't. They may have, but Steve, we were off the road, and Quincy was looking for songs, and so I don't know what I sent in, but I sent in a cassette, and I had on the back of my cassette. That's been when they had those Super Scope tape machines that when they'd get to the end, it would start playing the other side of the cassette automatically.
Right.
And so it jumped to the other side and played Steve Porcaro's demo for him. And he was like, why? Tell him that it's human nature. And Quincy dug it, and she played it for Michael. And they were just like, they cut it, you know?
Wow.
That was like the last song that went on the record, you know?
How did you, because I want to talk about this. I'm curious how you and Steve found how to coexist in terms of as keyboard players, synth players.
He would come up with something and say, Dave, I need some magic on this. I need an intro. Like he said on Human Nature. I've got the chords, but I need an intro. So, from Jimmy Seals, I had been used to doing finger picking guitar parts and translating them to piano so I could do, you know. So I did a little Jimmy Seals kind of thing for Human Nature, and I went, that's the intro to Human Nature that I came up with.
That is one of the coolest. That is one of the coolest.
And then
intros.
Steve had the song, and every time that comes up, it goes into that part. You know what I mean?
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What was it like being in the studio with Michael?
Michael was great in the studio. He was a perfectionist. And he just believed in you painting. He came up to me, here's a typical Michael Jackson thing. He'd say, I want you to think of Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. You have a total blank canvas. And if you need a choir, or you need an orchestra, you need whatever you need, just do it. just come up with think with it. Now, this wasn't during Thriller, though. This was after Thriller.
Right.
Michael, we continued working with
On
Michael.
Bad.
But working with Michael, I got in there one day, and I was working on Billie Jean, which I didn't end up using my parts. Nope, none of my parts. But I did it with Michael, and he would listen to what you're playing, and he kind of let a couple of little mistakes go by, and I stopped him, and I said, Michael, listen, I'm a perfectionist, and I want to make sure that all this stuff is perfect when we put it on there. So in the interim, he liked the fact that I wanted perfection on his record, and he'd call me in and say, I want you to come in and listen to my vocal that I'm doing, and tell me if it's good. And it kind of got me in trouble with Quincy a little bit, because Quincy was there, and Quincy goes, oh, Michael, what do you think? And he goes, ask David Paich what he thinks on the Human Nature vocal. And I'm like, And Quincy just gave me the look, like, oh, really? You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, man, So we got that straightened out. And then Michael was great to work with. Anybody that worked with him, he was just like, Jeff did beat. Jeff, they came to Jeff, and all they had was these drum cases that went, choo, 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 and they were singing the line, I think, in there. And then Steve and Jeff played all the instruments on it. Steve Lukather played bass, played rhythm guitar. Eddie did the solo, and Jeff played the drums on it.
Did Lukather want to do the solo? Or how did it end up that? Why did Lukather do the solo?
He was lucky to play on it. He was happy to play on it.
He was just happy to play on it.
Yeah. And then they said they were trying to get Ed Van Halen, which was Luke's friend. Luke's like, right on. Ed didn't want to do it at first because Van Halen had a no session band rule. You can't play on other people's records. So Eddie called him and said, this is Quincy Jones. He goes, yeah, sure. And he hung up on him. Okay? Ed did, you know what I mean? And I said, no, really, seriously. So he sent a tape in, and they flew it in. I don't know where. He just soloed, and they just took a piece of it and dropped it in on there.
Wow. Toto 4, you guys spent a lot of time in the studio.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time all the time.
So that's another year, man, where it's like if 78, your first record's coming out, all these big hits, and you got Cheryl Lynn's record out at the same time. This is like you got Toto 4, you got cooking. Thriller.
All the burners are on,
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
You got 4 records behind you.
Yeah.
Bunch of hits.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're doing sessions and touring and doing our Toto records at the time, So it was just kind of a revolving door at the recording studio, Sunset Sound. We'd see guys that were working on it. Thriller, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working with Quincy today. Well, we'll be there in a little bit. And,
How did Sunset Sound become your home, which is one of the great studios?
It was one of the great
LA.
studios.
Yeah.
And, we could basically work everywhere. I mean, we did Thriller at Westlake, the whole thing, We did Toto's first record at Studio 55, which was ended up becoming Richard Perry's studio. But we just liked Sunset Sound as a recording place, and that was during the Hydra record. We started working at Sunset Sound again.
Such a cool record.
And we loved playing there. We loved that. That was a real progressive music. We were trying to push ahead. Well, now that we had had a hit album, we kind of wanted to play some serious concert stuff here. Get into the way we would sound if we went out live and not just playing pop Georgie Porgy and
so first record was like let's craft a record.
Let's craft the record and let's find an audience.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of different kinds of things to find out. I know that there's got to be a single in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the record company grabbed hold of the line.
Yeah.
Little did I know.
Yeah. But then Hydra was like
Hydra was more. We were listening to Genesis at the time. You know what I mean? Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
And these progressive English groups that were doing, just blowing our minds, Wow. So we wanted to get more progressive and more musical, because we were just making music basically for ourselves and our friend musicians. So we could get together and smoke a little bit and listen to music,
Yeah.
And we wanted to have something interesting to play them, because everybody else was bringing in all this stuff that they're doing. And it was like, real musical stuff,
Yeah. Did you guys run into Prince at all? Because I know he was hunkered down at Sunset Sound
Jeff
too.
ran into Prince one time, and he was down there before we were down there, during we were down there.
Yeah, right on the time.
I didn't run into him. I think Jeff ran into him one time. But, He was down there with James Newton Howard working on his first album. Ray Parker, who's my neighbor.
Ray Parker's your neighbor?
Yeah, down the hill.
It's a bad man.
And he's my best friend. We grew up together. He came out from Detroit when he was 19, and I started working when I was 18 and 19. So we've been friends since we've been real young.
Amazing.
So Prince saw Ray Parker's had a studio in his house, and Prince said, "I want that." So Ray built Prince's first studio.
Really?
Yeah. So Ray set Prince up, and then I heard later on that Prince really liked Lukather as a guitar player, and I've gained so much respect for him lately, hearing how he plays guitar and the shows, the acoustic work, and he was a real talent, you know.
Man, you guys were around some of the coolest, greatest. I mean, the era of music you guys existed in. Because to your era, point, again, what remained of the jazz greats. Like you said, Oscar Peterson came to your house to work on to check out synthesizers.
He did. Because the Roland, the guy who invented a bunch of Roland stuff, was living at my house. Okay, Foster called me up and said, I got a guy from Canada named Ralph Bike. He works for Roland. Do you guys interested in this? We said, send him over. And he would just build stuff for us. And so he became friends with Oscar because Oscar's Canadian too.
Yeah.
So he brought Oscar Peterson over. We were like, I called James Newton Howard. So you got to get over here right now, man. This is going to get serious here, you know. And of course, I didn't take any pictures during the time, and I don't have any pictures from it.
Did he play on this piano?
No. I have a piano downstairs Oscar played on. Okay. It's a 9-foot Baldwin SD10. He looks at my piano and goes, "Nice box." You know?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, man.
How did you guys change as people before having those hits and having the hit? I mean, at any point did it get competitive? But not amongst you guys, but with other groups. Did you feel like, we want hits, or did you feel like we want to compete on the live? I mean, what was? Well,
it's so funny because after, like years later, I talked to some people that were session guys, Danny Korchmeyer, Danny Cooch, Waddy Wachtel. And they told me, we were so pissed off at you guys when you came out with Hold the Line. They go, that's a goddamn doo-wop song, and we should have played the solo on that record, not Lukather and everything like that, because Lukather played like a Brian May kind of Queen solo on it, you know. He shredded it, you know. And they were going to play like dun 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 dun. They wanted to treat it like a doo-wop song.
That's what's cool about you guys, is that you could do that doo-wop song, but then have Lukather do like a Brian May.
We were we were mashing up genres, you know, at the time.
It's the coolest thing about you guys, man.
And later on, me and Luke, we kind of were competitive with the songwriting.
Okay.
He'd bring in this, and I'd be like, I still today can't write. He writes, every time he breaks up with somebody, he would write a great ballad, a love ballad. And he's great. He kills it. And he sings it. And he sings them too, you know?
How did you guys work that out? I mean, there's so many people in the group who could sing the song, so many people who could write the song.
We would listen to the best songs. Here's anybody has a song, bring it in, and we'll listen to it. Now, let's listen to whose voice fits that. Yeah. And so each of us would try. You know, everybody tried to sing Africa. Yeah. They just couldn't spit all the words out. And I ended up singing the song that I wrote, you know.
Yeah, well, you had written it, so probably the words came a little easier to you.
You know, so as usual, the band says to me, next time you're going to write a #1 single, make sure that you're not the singer on it. Make sure our lead singer sings the whole thing. I'm like, guys, I didn't know. Did
you guys really not know Africa would be as big as it was?
No idea.
Really?
No idea.
Really?
That was the last song. That was the 11th hour song that we had the whole album done. And we just started experimenting with it. Well, here's maybe a song that, and they used to say it was a joke. Dave, save this for your solo record, which there was none. You know what I mean? Yeah. And or maybe for the next album, this is a good song.
Did it bum you out? Or they were
no. This is our
just fucking
sense
around.
of humor, just fucking with me. You know. Yeah. So we started experimenting with it around making a loop. We knew we had time because we'd already done our album. So we got in the studio and made a loop, a drum loop with Lynn Castro and Jeff Porcaro. And then I put on a CS80 thing, and we started building it little by little. And it just everybody was making their own parts up, and it just came to being, you know. Wow. And we were like, well, okay, this is the last cut. It's kind of different, kind of world music-y. And then they called from New York. Sony called and says they're playing it in a disco. A big disco. It's a big hit in New York. Africa is. And it started going around the United States. People started picking it up, and it just gained momentum.
So cool. You guys have these incredible pop songs. I mean, we're talking about Africa, Rosanna, songs like that. And then the solos that you're playing. Yeah. How did you pull back? Because, I mean, I would love to hear like an 8-minute solo
yeah.
of you.
Oh.
I mean, how did you guys contain
Trust
yourself
me,
in the
first
studio?
couple times we played Rosanna, we jammed on the end there.
Did you?
You
Okay.
just hear you hear a little short one.
I hear the short. I'm like,
Yeah,
I
because
want.
we said, well, we're going to keep it short this time, guys. You know what I mean? Keep the ending there. You know what I mean? Get it all in. But that went longer. That fade out probably went another 2 minutes. You know what I mean? We just faded it out. You
I
know?
would love to hear that.
Yeah,
I would love to hear
Me
that.
too.
I don't know how you guys did it. As like, there's not many groups who could be as musically inclined as you guys, and also, but also feel like kind of know like, okay, we got to do the short version.
Yeah,
on
shorter
this.
version.
That one's that's amazing, but that's not it.
That's the reason we just decided instead of forming a group, we got offers to form out of our high school band to sign a deal, and we turned it down because we said we want to go in and learn how to make records. So that we don't come out, we don't learn on our first record.
Yeah.
We're just barely learning how to make records here. So we each went off on different directions and we did a lot of sessions and gained all this knowledge. So we were we were like co-producing ourselves by the band members, by their experience.
Did you learn a lot about songwriting, playing on other people's songs?
Oh yeah,
learning charts and things like.
I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do because I would try and make them a little more my songs. I'd try and rearrange them and using my changes, but everybody else wanted to use these jazzy chords. Oh, it's like that's what Foster and Graydon and those guys were always at the Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yeah,
Everybody was trying to be Earth, Wind and Fire at the time. Okay, and so was I. So we all were. You know?
Yeah.
That's kind of Earth Windy right there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Diamonds and Rust, Joan Baez. Last thing
Oh
I'll ask
yeah, you
about.
know about that record.
How
huh?
did you end up on that?
I knew the producer. I'd worked with him, the guy named David Kirschenbaum, and he hired me. And the great thing was that I got to play with Joe Sample. Joe Sample and me played together on that. I played piano, and he played Roxy chord, I think, or electric piano Roxy chord. And they had Larry Carlton, Dean Parks, Jim Gordon on drums, and I just got to play on that record, and it was fun. Joan Baez was great. I had done a midnight special with her, with our band. She ended up using our band for backup band on Midnight Special. But funny story about Steely Dan, Walter Becker heard the Diamonds and Rust album and saw that Larry Carlton had arranged it. And that's why he called Carlton to arrange the Royal Scam album, because he said if they can make Joan Baez sound this good, they're going to be able to arrange our stuff. I mean, and that was the deal. That was the album that they got turned on to Larry Carlton. You know?
Dude, I mean, that's the song. Joan Baez says that's her best song.
Yeah, it was great.
And
it
Bob
was
Dylan
fun.
even was moved.
She was like Dylan's counterpart at the time.
Yeah, and he was moved to call her and tell her, this is incredible. You know? I mean, what a treat.
God, we could talk for another 2 hours.
I wanted to go through the room and just ask about everything you got here.
I'm going to show you downstairs real quick.
It'll be awesome. And maybe we'll do it again, man.
I think we should do it again. You know?
Cool.
Thanks so much to David Paich for inviting us into his home and playing for us. You can hear all of our favorite Toto songs and other stuff David's played on a playlist at brokenrecordpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced and edited by Leah Rose with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond. Subscribing to Pushkin Plus. Pushkin Plus is a podcast subscription that offers bonus content and ad-free listening for $4.99 a month. Look for Pushkin Plus on Apple Podcast subscriptions. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.